Sorry, I didn't know I was here.
Running from my ex, I stepped into the mob boss's private elevator. I just wanted to disappear before Caleb caught up with me in the lobby, but the elevator only had one button. When the doors opened, Dominic Vale was standing there, cold, armed, untouchable, looking at me as if he could see every mark I was trying to hide. My ex came up right behind me. Dominic didn't ask for my name. He didn't ask for an explanation. He just stepped in front of me and said, "She's with me now." Then he made me an offer. And I realized too late that men like him don't do anything for free. The question was, would I be willing to pay the price? Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Wrong Perfume in the Right Lobby. I woke up at 5:30 before the alarm. Like every morning for the past 8 months, the tiny Brooklyn apartment still smelled of the ink from the sketch I'd finished in the middle of the night, a small dragon coiled inside a child's notebook. I lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling in the corner by the window, and I went over the list in my head, the way you say a prayer. New number. Nobody from the old life has it. Different route from yesterday's. Always. Never the same coffee shop twice in the same week. No social media with photos. No location tags. No credit card used in a store anywhere near the apartment. Pepper spray in the left pocket of the bag. Keys between the fingers stepping off the subway. Head down. Never eye contact, but eyes on the storefront reflections. Caleb Hartley had connections in precincts, municipal courts, and society columns. The Hartleys were old money Manhattan, framed photos on the wall of the Plaza Ballroom, their surname on a hospital plaque. On the outside, charm. On the inside, the hand closing around my wrist under the dinner table at a family dinner while he smiled at his mother. The low voice in my ear about how I should dress, who I should laugh with, how much I was allowed to eat. The glass of wine spilled on me by accident, because I'd laughed too loud with one of his friends. 8 months ago, I grabbed a backpack, left the ring on his kitchen counter, and disappeared. I switched neighborhoods, changed my number, turned down work at a big publishing house, only took small jobs that paid in cash. I learned to breathe deep without him deciding for me when the air ran out. That Tuesday, I had to make rent. The job was simple. Illustrate the art catalog for a 5-star hotel in Midtown. Hand-deliver the boards in the lobby. Collect half the payment. Leave. A quick subway ride in broad daylight. I double-checked the manager's name, the curator's name, the name of every single vendor listed in the email. No familiar last names. No ties to his family. I took the subway to Midtown, holding the portfolio with the boards in my lap, fingers white from gripping the handle. The hotel smelled like cold marble and expensive cologne, the kind that lingers on the suit jackets of people who only walk through the lobby for 2 minutes. I crossed the lobby, counting the columns, counting the exits, counting the security guards in dark suits leaning discreetly against the walls. The curator was waiting for me near the front desk with a professional smile. I handed over the boards. She flipped through them quickly, complimented the line work, promised payment by Friday. I tightened my grip on the empty portfolio and turned to leave. It was in that half-second, between turning my body and taking the first step, that the air changed. Citrus, Sicilian lemon over a base of cedar, expensive, imported, the kind you only find in a boutique on Madison. I would recognize that cologne with my eyes closed, underwater, on the other side of the city. My body knew before my mind did. My hands went cold first, then my feet. Then a chill ran down the back of my neck as if someone had opened a window behind me. I turned my head slowly, the way you do when you don't want to wake an animal. There, on the other side of the lobby, by the concierge desk, was Caleb. Hair slicked back, light gray suit, polished smile aimed at the manager. Speaking quietly, gestures contained, the kind of man no one would ever picture smashing a porcelain vase over his fiancée's head because she was 15 minutes late. He could only have tracked me through the vendor registry. That was the only explanation that fit in my head in half a second. The hotel had logged my full name, my artist tax ID, my professional phone number. Somewhere in his family's web, some cousin, some political ally, some paid-off employee had gotten access to that list. And he had come, in person. I didn't run, not exactly. I walked fast toward the service corridor behind the front desk, like someone just looking for the bathroom. And there, out of the line of his sight, I picked up speed. The empty portfolio slapped against my thigh. My heart slammed against my throat. I passed a linen cart that reeked of bleach. a housekeeper in a burgundy uniform who didn't even glance up, a half-open fire door. I found the elevator at the end of the corridor. Brushed steel doors, no plaque, no call button lit, reflecting my own pale face back at me, distorted. It was open. I stepped in. The doors slid shut behind me with a soft, almost polite sound. I let out the breath I'd been holding since the lobby. I pressed my forehead against the cold steel, letting the metal calm my pounding temple. I counted to 10. When I raised my face to press the lobby button, because the plan was to slip out the back, grab a cab, get back to Brooklyn, and never set foot in Midtown again, I stopped. The panel had a single button, PH. No lobby, no basement, no garage, no intermediate floor numbers. One silver button, alone, with 2 letters engraved in subtle relief. The elevator was already climbing. I hadn't pressed anything. It had been called from above. My breathing started failing again. I looked down at my feet on the dark carpet, looked at the ceiling, looked at the panel again, as if the letters might change if I blinked hard enough. They didn't. PH meant penthouse, and a penthouse in a hotel like that meant a private residence, and a private residence with an elevator that didn't take outside calls meant one single thing: an entire floor belonging to someone who did not want to be disturbed. I jabbed the close door button as if it wasn't already closed. I jabbed it again. I reached for the emergency panel. Before I could touch it, the elevator stopped. A discreet chime sounded. The doors opened. The air on the other side was different. Cleaner, higher, more expensive. Double-height ceilings, light marble floors with dark veining, a floor-to-ceiling glass wall looking out over Manhattan in all its arrogance. A faint smell of fine wood and freshly brewed black coffee hung in the air, as if the morning there had just begun. I saw the city before I saw the man, and I lost 3 seconds staring at the glass before I realized I wasn't alone. He was standing in the center of the room, about 10 steps from the elevator, dark suit impeccable, white shirt with no tie, right hand resting casually in his trouser pocket. On the left, at his waist, beneath the open jacket, the dark grip of a gun. 2 men behind him, broader, quieter, with that kind of stillness that only exists in people who learned early how to wait for an order. And his face. He was beautiful in a cold way. Sharp angles, a jaw that looked like it had been drawn by someone with a ruler. But that wasn't what froze me. It was the look. It was a look that decided. Didn't examine, didn't judge, didn't greet, decided. The way a man looks at a piece that's landed on the wrong table and is silently calculating where it will end up. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice came out thin, childish, wrong. I got into the wrong elevator. He didn't answer. He didn't move his hand from his pocket. His eyes traveled down my body in what wasn't a male gaze. It was an inventory. They stopped on my hands. I looked down and saw what he was seeing. The small, rhythmic tremor that I had never been able to hide from anyone paying attention. They moved to my neck. I didn't need to touch it to know my pulse was jumping against the skin. They lingered a second on my mouth, another on my eyes, and finally, they went to the spot behind me, where the elevator doors had just closed. In 3 seconds, he read the entire story I had spent 8 months trying to bury. "I'm sorry," I repeated. "I'll go down now. I didn't know this elevator." "Who?" he said. That was the first word. Just one. Low voice, deep, unhurried, with a faint accent under the perfect English. It wasn't a question of curiosity. It was a question of protocol. "Who is the man you're running from? In my building, inside my elevator, in my living room. Answer required. Now." I opened my mouth, closed it. The shame came before the fear. Shame for having walked into a place I didn't belong. Shame for having the tremor exposed in front of a stranger. Shame for still, after 8 months, not being able to say the name out loud without my stomach tightening. The portfolio in my hand weighed as if it were full of stone, not paper. Before I could answer, the phone on the wall beside him rang. A short, sharp, professional sound. One of the men behind him picked it up, listened for 3 seconds, lowered the receiver, and said something in Italian too low for me to catch in full. I caught one word: fiancé. The man with the gun at his waist tilted his head a centimeter toward his capo, took the information without reacting, and looked back at me. His eyes were such a dark gray, they looked black under that cold window light. "The front desk is reporting," he said, in the same controlled tone, "that a man is coming up the fire stairs claiming to be your fiancé. He bribed a valet. He's on the 12th floor now, about 4 minutes out." The floor dropped from under me. Not literally. It was the feeling you get standing on a boat when you realize the tide has turned. I looked at the elevator behind me, closed, mute, useless, and at the glass wall to my right, which dropped some 40-plus floors, and at the stranger in front of me, with a gun at his waist, and 2 silent capos behind him. There was no way out. "He's not my fiancé," I said. It was the only thing I could manage. The voice came out steadier than I expected, and that surprised me more than anything. "He's not my fiancé anymore." For the first time, something moved on his face. It was a millimeter at the jaw, maybe less, but I saw it. He took his hand out of his pocket, slowly, no theater, and made a single, short gesture toward the capo on the left. The man left the room toward the corridor with the silent stride of someone who knows exactly what to do without hearing the full order. The other one stayed. "Ma'am," he said. It was the first time someone had called me ma'am in 8 months without expecting anything in return. "You're going to stand behind that couch. You're going to set the portfolio down. You're not going to say anything when the doors open. I'll handle this." I started. "Behind the couch," he repeated, without raising his voice a single degree. "Please." The please broke me more than anything else. I walked to the dark leather couch, went around it, set the portfolio on the carpet, and crouched down. The leather smelled new, like something imported, like a life that had never been mine. My heart was beating so loudly, I was sure he could hear it from across the room. I reached for the pepper spray in my bag pocket out of reflex, and realized, mid-motion, that it was the first time in 8 months I wasn't alone while making that gesture. I heard the metallic sound of the elevator rising again, the chime, the doors opening, and over the back of the couch, I saw his profile, the man from the penthouse, standing facing the elevator, hand back in his pocket, completely calm, waiting, the way you wait for dinner to be served. Caleb stepped out of the elevator. Chapter 2. She's with me now. I recognized the footsteps before I recognized the silhouette. Caleb had always walked a specific way, heel first, weight firm, leather shoe striking the floor as if the floor owed him an answer. Behind the couch, I closed my eyes for half a second. When I opened them, he was already in the room, breathing hard, tie crooked, the rehearsed smile starting to unravel at the corners. "Good morning," Caleb said, catching his breath. His voice climbed half a tone, that polished boy tone he used with doormen, waiters, and his girlfriend's fathers. "I apologize for the intrusion. There's been a misunderstanding. My fiancée got into this elevator by mistake. I came to get her." The man from the penthouse didn't answer. He stayed standing, hand in pocket, eyes fixed, as if Caleb were a piece of furniture someone had forgotten in the wrong spot. The high morning light came straight through the glass wall and hit the dark wood floor, leaving half the room in an almost clinical white, and the other half, where he stood, in a cold shadow that seemed deliberately chosen. "She's been having problems," Caleb continued, and his voice dropped to that confidential register, brother-in-law, man to man. "I don't know if she mentioned anything. She's unstable. She has episodes. She runs off, then calls crying, asking to come back. Her family knows. Mine too. It's a delicate matter. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me take her home in peace. No fuss." Behind the couch, I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. Unstable. It was the word he used at his mother's Sunday dinners when I wasn't at the table. The word that opened doors in private practices, in police stations, in law firms. A polite word for burying a woman alive. "Ivy," Caleb called, turning his face in my direction, even though he couldn't see me. The forced sweetness in his voice turned my stomach. "Sweetheart, let's go. You're not well. We'll talk about it at home." The man from the penthouse took one step forward. Just one. No rush, no visible aggression in the movement. It was the kind of step a large animal takes when it decides that piece of ground belongs to it. Caleb, without realizing it, took half a step back. "Mr. Hartley," the man from the penthouse said. I saw Caleb's neck tighten. He hadn't introduced himself. Nobody at the front desk had given his last name. The fact that this man knew without asking made his smile slip another inch. "Yes," Caleb answered, cautious. "And you are?" "Dominic Vale." 2 names, 4 syllables, and the effect on Caleb's face was instant. I watched the color drain from his skin in waves. First the forehead, then the cheeks, then the neck. The Hartleys knew Manhattan. They knew who controlled what in the precincts, the courts, the registry offices. Above all, they knew which names you didn't repeat out loud at family dinners. Vale was one of those names. Caleb swallowed dry. He tried to recover the smile. He couldn't quite manage it. "Mr. Vale," he began. "I didn't realize that. My apologies for the inconvenience. I'll head down right now. And if Miss Blackwood is here, He took a step toward the couch. I didn't see Dominic cross the room. I saw him with his right hand closed around Caleb's wrist, holding his arm halfway through the motion, frozen mid-air. The movement was so unhurried, it looked like a rehearsed slow-motion sequence. Caleb didn't scream. He couldn't. He looked at his own wrist, then at Dominic's face, and went still. "She's with me now," Dominic said. His voice didn't go up a decibel. He didn't tighten his grip more or less or anything. He just said it, low, the way a judge reads a sentence in an empty courtroom. It wasn't the line of a jealous lover. It wasn't a romantic promise. It was jurisdiction. It was a stamp. This woman has crossed into Vale territory, and you touch her over my dead body. And then, over yours. Caleb had gone completely pale. He tried to laugh, that short, fake laugh of men who have lost control of a room for the first time in their lives, but the laugh died in the middle of his chest. "I didn't know," Caleb muttered. "She didn't tell me. I had no idea, Mr. Vale. I'm sorry. There's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Dominic answered. He let go of Caleb's wrist with the same calm he had used to grab it. "There's a choice. You can ride down in the elevator with me escorting you, or you can go down the same fire stairs you came up. Personally, I recommend the elevator. The stairs in this building are long, and the cameras don't all work." The capo who had stayed in the room crossed toward Caleb without a word. Caleb looked at the couch one last time, and for a second I saw in him the thing I'd always seen in him in his apartment, at night, behind the closed doors, the pure hate, the urge to break something, the need to make me pay for an audience I would never have again. But the look passed. He lowered his eyes. He let himself be led to the elevator. The doors closed behind him with a brushed metal whisper, and the silence that remained in the room was dense, almost a third body in the space. I stayed crouched behind the couch for 3 more seconds after the chime sounded, maybe longer. My knees weren't working right. The carpet smelled like clean wool and a discreet woody cologne, vetiver, maybe sandalwood, something that belonged to the man still standing on the other side of the furniture. "Miss Blackwood," Dominic said, without turning toward the couch. "You can stand up." I rose slowly, gripping the leather back so I wouldn't fall. My legs were jelly. The empty portfolio on the carpet looked like someone else's object. I walked around the couch carefully and stood in the middle of the rug, about 10 feet from him. He turned, right hand back in his pocket, posture identical to the moment the doors had first opened, as if nothing had happened in the room. "Thank you," I said. The word came out small. I hated the sound of it. He looked at me for a long second, didn't acknowledge the thanks, just gestured shortly toward an armchair near the window. "Sit. We need to talk." I sat, not out of obedience, because my legs had no opinion left about staying upright. He remained standing by the glass wall, silhouetted against Manhattan, and started speaking in the same measured tone he'd used to dispatch Caleb. "Caleb Hartley," Dominic said, "has 3 uncles in elected office in the state of New York, 1 first cousin who is a federal judge, and a godfather who was once a U.S. attorney. His family is currently financing 3 active municipal campaigns. The police in this city, Miss Blackwood, do not stand up to the Hartleys. I assume you've already figured that out. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hand-delivering illustrations in a portfolio at a hotel with a registered vendor list." I didn't answer. He wasn't expecting one. "Now," he continued, "Mr. Hartley has just seen you inside my penthouse. He's going to assume, because he's a proud and stupid man, that you came up here under your own power, and that you belong to me by choice. That assumption will protect you. From today on, attacking you means attacking the Vale family. Mr. Hartley will do that math. So will his cousins." I clasped my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking. I lifted my chin. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "And what do you want in exchange?" Dominic hadn't expected that line. I could tell by the single millimeter his left eyebrow rose. It was the first thing that had looked human on his face since the elevator doors first opened. He stared at me for longer than felt comfortable. The corner of his mouth, I swear, moved slightly. It might have been the light. "You're not going to thank me," he said. "I already did," I answered. "Now I'm asking the price." He tilted his head a degree, as if I were an interesting problem on a desk. "I'll think about it," Dominic said at last. "For now, I'll set this. You sleep here. There's a guest room at the end of the west corridor." He pulled a small key from the inner pocket of his suit jacket and held it out on an open palm. He didn't take a step to deliver it. He waited for me to get up and come get it. "The lock is on the inside. You keep the key. No one comes in unless you open the door. I, personally, knock." I rose, crossed the rug, and took the key. The metal was warm from his pocket, and bore the fine etching of an old-fashioned head, the kind you see on doors of family homes that have stood for generations. I closed my hand around it. The warmth passed into my skin and stayed there, against my lifeline, as if it had been placed on purpose. "And the cover story?" I asked. "3 family events," he said. "As my wife. Enough for the city to understand that you are not a subject to be discussed with the Hartleys. After that, we talk." "I keep working," I said. "I keep my name in the credits of the catalog. I have my own phone, with a number no one in the family monitors. I go out alone when I need to." He looked at me. The corner of his mouth moved again. This time it wasn't the light. "Granted," Dominic answered. It was a half smile. Small, contained, entirely out of place on a face that had just dispatched a man down a stairwell with broken cameras. I didn't understand it. In that second, with the key burning in my palm, I didn't understand why he had smiled, or why the smile had unsettled me more than anything else that had happened in the last hour. It was as if I had just passed a test I didn't know I was taking, and he had marked down the grade in a notebook I would never read. He called the capo. He asked them to take me to the guest room. He asked, in the same calm sentence, for tea and something to eat to be sent up, and for the housekeeper to be told to put my measurements on the list. He didn't ask my measurements. He didn't ask if I wanted to eat. The room was bigger than my entire Brooklyn apartment. A window looking out on the other side of the city, a bed with 4 pillows, a marble bathroom. The curtains were a raw linen that stirred on its own when the air conditioning kicked on, and there was a faint smell of eucalyptus from a diffuser in the corner, as if someone had thought about someone arriving tired. I put the key in the lock from the inside, turned it, listened for the click. I pressed my forehead to the wood. I breathed. It was at night, after the tea had gone cold untouched on the tray, and I had spent an hour sitting on the edge of the bed staring at the key in my palm as if it were a small, strange animal, that I heard it. 3 knocks, polite, spaced out, on the door from the other side. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "Miss Blackwood," Dominic's voice came low, from the other side of the wood. "I had something sent up in case you'd rather eat something warm before sleeping. The tray is on the floor, to the left of the door. You don't have to open it now. Good night." I heard his footsteps move away down the corridor, slow, spaced out, the same way as the rest of him. I waited another 5 minutes, 10. When I finally cracked the door open, with the key still tangled in my fingers, I saw the tray, soup, dark bread, a small carafe of water, and beside it, with no note, a steaming mug. A thin curl of steam rose in a spiral, catching the yellow light of the hallway lamp. I brought my face closer. It smelled like chocolate and cinnamon. I had never mentioned cinnamon to anyone in that house. I closed the door, locked it from the inside. I sat on the floor with my back against the wood, the warm mug between both hands, and I didn't sleep. Chapter 3. The door at the end of the corridor. The first thing I learned about Dominic Vale's penthouse was that it breathed in silence. There was no hum of an old refrigerator, no upstairs neighbor scraping a chair, no ancient pipe in my Brooklyn apartment groaning in the middle of the night like a tired animal. It was an expensive silence, the kind only very old money buys. I woke up on the second morning with the gray light of Manhattan filtering through the curtains that someone, not me, had left parted to exactly the right width for sleep not to hurt. The lock on the door was still where I had turned it the night before, the key still in the keyhole on my side, the way he had made a point of showing me. I stared at the key for a full minute before getting up. In the kitchen, I found the housekeeper, a woman of about 50 named Adelaide, who greeted me with a nod and went back to her coffee as if I were a new plant in the corner of the room. I asked about Mr. Vale. She pointed down a corridor with her wooden spoon. I walked barefoot across the cold floor until I accidentally discovered the map of the house I would memorize over the weeks to come. The penthouse had wings. In the west wing were my bedroom, the library, the reading room, and the makeshift studio he had set up before I even asked. In the east wing was the rest of his life, and at the end of that east corridor, there was a door. I noticed it on the 3rd day. Dark wood, no visible handle, recessed lock. I passed it 3 times that morning, pretending to look for the formal dining room, and all 3 times the door stayed exactly closed. It wasn't just locked. It was deliberately ignored by everyone who passed there. Adelaide would walk by and look away. The capo on duty would walk by and look away. The 4th time I walked past, I looked away too, because that was the first thing I'd learned about being alive on a dangerous floor. You do not look at what you're pretending not to see. I noticed something else on Thursday. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, the elevator came up on its own, with a gray-haired man in a gray suit, thin-rimmed glasses, and a leather briefcase worn from use. Matteo, the consigliere. Dominic introduced me in passing in the living room, the way you introduce someone to a wall clock. Matteo shook my hand with a politeness I had seen in my old art history professors. "Miss Blackwood," he said, with an accent that chewed on the surname. "I hope you're comfortable." "I am," I answered. I wasn't, but he knew that, and I knew that he knew, and neither of us had to clarify. Matteo came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. He was a pendulum. I started marking Thursdays on my new phone calendar, just to have the feeling of controlling one day of the week. The third thing I learned was about the knocks. Dominic knocked before entering. Always. 3 times. Spaced out. Dry. Like someone typing a code. Even when my bedroom door was unlocked because I had forgotten. Even when I was awake and he knew it. 3 knocks. A pause. A low voice from the other side. He never turned a handle without a response. I pretended this didn't undo me. I pretended well. On the 4th day, a Wednesday, I sat at the formal dining table for the first time. Just Dominic and me. A domestic dinner. It was a table for 12, and there were 2 of us. Dominic sat at the head. I sat in the chair immediately to his right, the spot Adelaide had set without asking. He asked me, without raising his eyes from his plate, whether I'd prefer she change anything on the menu. "Anything's fine," I said, and then immediately regretted sounding too polite. I corrected myself. "I don't like eggplant, and I've never had wine at night without sleeping badly afterwards." He filed both things away in his head. I saw it, because his eyes paused at a fixed point on the table for the exact length of a written word. Then he changed the subject. He asked if the studio's internet was working. He asked if I needed a bigger easel. At some point between the 2nd and 3rd course, I mentioned, without thinking, because he had this way of getting people to talk without warning, that my mother used to make hot chocolate with cinnamon when I had nightmares. I said it quickly, like throwing a stone in water to change the subject, and then I asked if he'd like more bread. He said no. He filed that too, somewhere on the table. I didn't notice. The next morning, before coffee, I found on my bedside table a white porcelain mug with steaming hot chocolate and a dark brown powder dusted over the top. Cinnamon. No note. No warning. Adelaide had come in to make the bed. That was the explanation I gave myself while holding the mug between my hands. Adelaide, the same woman who in 4 days had still not dusted my dresser because she said that wing was for personal care and she did not intrude. "Adelaide," I told the wall, lifting the mug to my mouth. "Good Adelaide." The chocolate was perfect. Hot, but not enough to burn. Sweet, but not cloying. Cinnamon in the exact measure of my childhood. I drank it all sitting on the edge of the bed, barefoot on the rug, pretending to myself that I wasn't crying over a mug. In the afternoon, in the studio, I picked up the notebook and drew without thinking. A man in a dark suit, from behind, writing something on an invisible point on a table. When I realized what I had drawn, I tore the page out and tucked it folded inside the thickest book on the shelf. Not to hide it from him. To hide it from myself. The first event came on Friday. Dominic explained it to me in the morning, in the front office, with its view of Manhattan. A closed dinner for the capos. 4 men. Renzo, Bruno, Salvatore, Enzo. You sit at my right, speaking the minimum, eating whatever you want, and leaving the room when I look at you for 3 seconds. 3 seconds, I repeated. You'll know it when it happens. And if it doesn't, it will, he said, with no arrogance, the way you say the sun rises in the east. I put on a black dress Adelaide had hung in the closet without comment. Discreet, expensive, exactly my height. I didn't ask how he knew my exact height. I had decided that day that every question would be a debt, and I wanted to end the month in the black. The capos arrived with the punctuality of men who fear being late. Renzo was the tallest, gray hair cut short, big hands, an onyx ring on his little finger. He smelled of whiskey before the first toast. Salvatore was the oldest and the quietest. Bruno had a scar cutting through his right brow. Enzo, the youngest, barely looked at me. Renzo did. Renzo looked at me too much already by the first glass. He looked again at the second. By the third, the second course had been served, and he leaned toward Bruno and murmured something in Italian, assuming the wine guaranteed him a private translation. I understood every word. I had studied Italian enough to recognize what he was saying, and Renzo's sentence wasn't the kind you translate without disgust. It was short and dirty, and it mentioned my mouth in a way that made the wine taste bitter in mine. I didn't lift my eyes from the plate. I closed my left hand around the napkin in my lap. and breathed through my nose. Dominic, at the head of the table, didn't change his tone. He kept cutting his meat with the same calm with which he had cut the first piece. He waited for Renzo to finish laughing at his own joke. He waited for the silence to return to the table. And he said quietly, "Renzo, stand up." Renzo laughed. He thought it was a joke. "Stand up," Dominic repeated, without looking at him. "And leave." The laugh died. The other 3 capos held their forks in the air a second longer than they should have. Renzo opened his mouth to answer, but whatever he saw on Dominic's face must have been enough, because he pushed his chair back, tossed his napkin onto the plate, and crossed the room without another word. The door closed. Dominic kept cutting his meat. "Miss Blackwood," Salvatore said after a long silence in careful English. "More wine?" "No, thank you." The dinner ended at 11. I went up to my room and stood by the window watching Manhattan blink. When I heard the 3 knocks at the door, I took a second before answering. Dominic on the other side. Without coming in, he asked if I was all right. I said yes. He said good night. He left. 2 days later, I learned from Adelaide that Renzo was no longer at the meetings. He had been demoted. The onyx ring on his little finger returned. His responsibilities, redistributed between Bruno and Enzo. I went looking for Dominic that same afternoon in the front office. I knocked lightly, spacing the taps the way he usually did. I waited. He told me to come in. "I know how to defend myself," I said from the door. He raised his eyes from the laptop without moving in the chair. "I know," he answered, "but today, you didn't have to." I stood at the door longer than I'd planned. When I left, I closed it without slamming, and I realized in the corridor that I had walked past the door with no visible handle again. This time I didn't look away immediately. This time I looked for 2 full seconds. Then I kept going. The early hours of Sunday morning were when the wall cracked for the first time. I went down to the kitchen around 3 a.m., thirsty and with my hair tangled from a sleep that wasn't coming, barefoot, wearing the loose t-shirt I'd slept in since Brooklyn. I wasn't expecting anyone to be awake. The kitchen was empty, but the library, across the corridor, had a sliver of light under the door. I should have gone back to my room. That's what I thought, and that's exactly what I didn't do. I pushed the library door open slowly. Dominic was sitting in the armchair near the window. No jacket, no tie. His white shirt sleeve rolled up to the elbow and a deep cut on his left forearm. There was a surgical needle between the fingers of his right hand, the wrong hand, because the cut was on his dominant arm, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the floor next to the chair. The blood had run down his elbow and stained the leather arm of the chair. He saw me before I spoke. He didn't look surprised, just tired. "Go back to your room, Blackwood," he said, low. I didn't go back. I crossed the library, picked up the open kit of gauze and antiseptic on the table beside him, and sat on the arm of the chair, to his right. I held out my hand. I waited. He looked at me for a stretch of time that felt longer than it was. Then he handed me the needle. I had never stitched skin before. My hands trembled, but not for the reason they usually trembled. They trembled from proximity. I could feel his breath on my shoulder, the smell of whiskey mixed with something woody and warm I had no name for. They trembled because of that. I worked slowly. I cleaned the cut with the antiseptic, and he didn't flinch, though I knew it stung. I put in 3 small stitches. When I finished the last one, I cut the thread with the small scissors from the kit, pressed the gauze against the wound, and started wrapping the strip around his forearm. He didn't say anything the entire time. Neither did I. When I was done, I started to stand from the arm of the chair. Before I could, he closed his hand around my wrist. He didn't pull. He didn't squeeze. He just closed his long fingers around my left wrist, exactly at the spot where the pulse beats. 1 second, 2 seconds. He let go. The skin of my wrist stayed marked by the heat of his hand for longer than it should have. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time I had heard that word from his mouth. I stood without answering, because I didn't trust my voice, and I crossed the library back. In the corridor, instead of turning left toward my bedroom, I turned right for 2 steps. Just 2. I stopped in front of the door with no visible handle at the end of the east corridor. I pressed my palm against the cold wood. I could have pushed. I didn't know if it would open, but I could have tried. I took my hand away. I turned around. I went back to my bedroom, locked the door from the inside, lay down on the bed with my eyes open in the dark, and I decided, staring at the ceiling, that it would not be tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either, but not tonight. My left wrist still burned. Chapter 4. You don't have to pretend so well. 3 weeks. That's how long the truce lasted between the night in the library and the night I admitted for the first time that I wasn't pretending. 3 weeks in which no one commented on the 3 stitches on his left forearm, even though I saw the white wrap peeking out of his rolled-up sleeve every morning at breakfast. 3 weeks in which no one commented on the mug of hot chocolate that kept appearing on my nightstand on the nights I woke up gasping. Adelaide, sainted Adelaide, who still had not dusted the dresser. 3 weeks in which I pretended to draw landscapes and drew his hands. The thick knuckles, the callus on his right palm, the wrist of his watch. Always the hands, never his whole face, because the whole face was too much of an admission. On a Thursday afternoon, Matteo had come up at 4 and gone down at 6, and I already had his rhythm memorized. Dominic called me to the empty ballroom of the penthouse. I hadn't even known there was a ballroom in the penthouse. It was an enormous room in the northwest corner, light wood floor, chandelier unlit, tall mirrors covering the entire back wall. The smell was of new wax and something older underneath, maybe from the velvet of the heavy curtains that covered the windows down to the floor. The acoustics of his footsteps changed when he walked in. "Saturday is the charity gala," he said without greeting. "You're going to dance with me. I don't waltz." "I know." He took off his jacket, draped it over the back of a solitary chair in the corner, and held out his hand. I stared at the hand for a moment longer than necessary. Then I took it. His hand was warm. The other hand settled at my waist at the exact measure a dance instructor would have placed it. Not a millimeter lower, not a millimeter higher. He started counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. He corrected my left foot when I swapped it with the right. He corrected my shoulder when I locked it. He corrected my hand at the level of his shoulder when I let it drop. It wasn't flirting. It was technique. It was the neutral voice of someone teaching a person how to reload a gun. My breathing was what gave me away. Around the 5th turn, I realized I was breathing through my mouth, shallow, like someone trying not to make any noise. I looked at the mirrors at the back and we both appeared. Me, barefoot, in a simple cotton dress, my hair pinned up, my face red. Him, in a white shirt and dark trousers, the white wrap of the bandage still showing under the rolled-up sleeve of his left forearm. I looked quickly at the floor. "Saturday, the heels will change your posture," he said low. "Don't lock your hips." "I'm not locking my hips. You're holding your breath." "I'm not." He stopped counting. He didn't let go of my hand, didn't take his hand off my waist. He just stopped. The silence of the empty ballroom swallowed the last beat and hung between us, dense, heavier than the music he was no longer humming. I held my breath for real now. "Blackwood," he said. "What?" "Breathe." I breathed. He started counting again. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. When I left the ballroom an hour later, I went straight to the studio and drew a hand at the waist of a woman with no face. When I realized what I had drawn, I didn't tear out the page. I closed the notebook and left it on the couch in the reading room, on top of the cushion, as if it were forgotten. It wasn't. The charity gala was at a partner hotel in Manhattan on Saturday night, under crystal chandeliers that seemed to have been made for people who knew exactly how to walk under chandeliers. Adelaide had hung in the closet that morning, a wine-colored dress, long, no neckline, no sleeves, a cut that held the waist without squeezing it. I didn't ask the price. I had learned in those 3 weeks that asking the price of anything in that house was a useless exercise in humiliation. Dominic waited for me in the elevator hall, in a black tuxedo, a wine-colored tie the exact shade of my dress. He didn't mention the coincidence. Neither did I. In the car on the way to the hotel, he said little. He recited names I was supposed to recognize if I heard them. 3 senators, 2 businessmen, a duchess who was visiting New York for the first time, and he told me that if I didn't know how to answer a question, I should look at him with my head slightly tilted and smile. He would handle it. For 2 seconds, I found the instruction insulting. Then I understood that he was giving me an exit, not a leash. In the gala ballroom, we danced together in public for the first time after the second toast. The orchestra struck up an old waltz. He led me to the center of the floor with his hand at my waist, the hand I already knew. The other couples opened up a space. I felt the eyes glued to the back of my neck like insects. I danced. I didn't lock my hips. I kept my hand at the level of his shoulder. I smiled, 3 times, in the exact measure, at the 3 correct people. Around the 4th turn, he tilted his head just slightly, the amount no one would notice from a distance, and whispered against my temple, "You don't have to pretend so well." The sentence ran down my spine like cold water. I kept dancing. I smiled at the Duchess as she passed by on the arm of a white-haired senator. I counted the steps in my head. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, because that was the only anchor I had. When the music ended, he led me to the balcony of the ballroom, ordered a sparkling water for me without asking, and stood in silence by my side, staring at the yellow city lights. The autumn wind carried the smell of rain not yet arrived, and the cigarette of someone on another balcony. I thought, with the cold clarity of someone rationalizing to survive, the following: he's the host. I'm a practical obligation. He said that because he's tired of the act and wanted to remind me to drop my guard so I wouldn't look too stiff. It wasn't personal. It was nothing. I drank the sparkling water. I smiled. I went back inside with him, and I pretended for the rest of the night that the sentence had not opened a fissure right down the middle of my chest. The next night, he found the notebook. I know he found it because I left it there. It had been deliberately forgotten on top of the cushion of the couch in the reading room. I wanted to know what he would do, and I hated myself for wanting to know, and even so I left it. I went back to the reading room around 10 at night, with a ready excuse. Oh, I left the notebook here, and found it in exactly the same place. Adelaide had already turned off the lights in that room. Dominic was in the office, I knew, because I could see the slit of light under his door. I picked up the notebook. I flipped quickly to the end of the block, to the portrait of him sleeping in the library that night, drawn from memory 3 days later, with the white bandage in pencil and the hair falling over his closed eyes. The page had been cut, not torn, not ripped out in a hurry, cut flush to the spiral, with some kind of thin blade tool, the way you separate a full page from a well-bound notebook without leaving a wrinkle. I stared at the empty space where the drawing should have been. I ran my finger along the clean edge of the cut. I closed the notebook. I didn't go to his office to ask. I didn't knock 3 times on his door. I didn't accuse. I didn't admit, not even to myself, what that clean cut on the spiral meant. I went back to my room. I locked the door from the inside. I put the notebook on the nightstand, next to the empty hot chocolate mug Adelaide hadn't yet collected, and I stared at the ceiling until almost dawn. The storm came the following Wednesday. It started at dusk, the kind of autumn storm in New York that makes the glass tremble in the windows and the wind moan between the buildings, as if it were looking for something specific. Adelaide lit the fireplace before going down. Dominic retired early, claiming a headache. I tried to draw, and couldn't. I turned off the studio light just before midnight and went to my room. Around 2 a.m, I heard the cry. It wasn't loud. It was low and cut off, the way you cry in your sleep when the dream squeezes your throat before the sound can come out whole. It came from across the corridor, from his bedroom. I sat up in bed. I waited. A second cry came, shorter than the first. I got up. I crossed the corridor barefoot, in the dark, my heart beating in my left wrist at the exact spot where he had held it 10 days earlier. The wood floor was cold under the soles of my feet. I knocked 3 times on his door. I waited. No answer. I knocked again. I waited. Nothing. And then I did the one thing that house did not permit. I turned the handle without permission. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, in dark cotton pajamas, his right hand trembling on the nightstand a centimeter from the gun. He was sweating. His eyes were open and unfocused, fixed on a wall he wasn't seeing. The white wrap of the left forearm was no longer there. The cut had healed into a thin red line running down the muscle. "Dominic," I said, low from the door. He turned his head slowly, the way you recognize a voice coming from a very distant place. "Go back to your room, Blackwood." "No." I crossed the room. I sat on the edge of his bed, far away, the distance 2 adult people can manage on a double bed without touching, and folded my hands in my lap so I wouldn't make the wrong gesture. "Tell me," I said. He looked at me for a long time. His right hand was still trembling near the gun. Slowly, with no haste at all, he moved his hand away from the metal and let it fall on his own knee. "My mother," he said, his voice broken in the way of someone who hadn't said those 2 words out loud in many years. I was 12. I didn't answer. I waited. "Car bomb," he went on. "The target was my father. She was leaving a school meeting. I was supposed to be in the car with her. I had forgotten a notebook in the classroom and ran back to get it. When I came out the school door, the explosion had already happened." He was looking at the window. The rain was hitting the glass in an uneven rhythm. They got her because they knew she'd be there. They knew the time. They knew the car. They knew the side she sat on because the driver drove. They knew everything they knew because someone from the house told them. And that person told them because my father protected his wife with silence, thinking he was keeping her out of it that way. He didn't. He choked on his own breath. I waited. I have never touched a woman without her asking me to, Blackwood. Not once. Because my mother was killed by men who took what they wanted. and I swore at 12 years old that I would not be one of them, not even by mistake. He looked at me. I know how it looks, me offering you a room with a lock on the inside. It looks ridiculous, but it's the one old promise I still keep to her. My eyes burned. I didn't cry. I tightened my hands in my lap. Why are you telling me this? I asked softly. He took a long time to answer. When he did, it was almost as if he were speaking to the rain, not to me. Because you knocked on the door. We stayed silent for a long time. The rain eased. At some point, he leaned his back against the headboard. His breathing began to settle. His eyes began to weigh. I watched, from my corner of the bed, his head slowly tilt to one side. I stood up slowly to leave. I'd taken 2 steps toward the door. Stay, he said, his voice already half asleep. I stopped. I went back. I sat again on the edge of the bed, with my feet on the cold rug, and I stayed there until the rhythm of his breath turned into the deep breathing of someone really sleeping for the first time in who knows how many nights. I didn't touch him. He didn't touch me. His right hand stayed open on his knee, far from the gun on the nightstand. I left before dawn, when the sky began to lighten from blue to gray. I closed his door with the care of someone closing something that needs to stay closed, and at the same time open. I crossed the corridor back to my own room. I stopped halfway. I looked at the door with no visible handle at the end of the east corridor. I looked at the door of my room, on the other side. The way back to my room, for the first time, seemed too long. Chapter 5. Microphone in the right girl's hand. The morning arrived gray over Manhattan 10 days after the storm, and I woke up before the alarm with the strange feeling that I had slept without locking the door. I looked at the handle for a moment, still lying down, noticing the outline of the key sitting in the keyhole, on the inside, untouched. Not from that night, but from the last 3. The whole room looked different, as if it had shrunk to fit someone less frightened than I had been 40 days earlier. The cold light hit the closet mirror and traced a pale strip on the beige rug. I lay watching that strip until it trembled with the passage of some random cloud over the building. Adelaide knocked 3 times and left coffee outside, in her usual methodical way. I put on jeans and a knit sweater, pulled my hair into a low bun, slipped on sneakers, and went downstairs. Dominic was already in the entrance hall, dark jacket without a tie, signet ring on his little finger, car keys dangling from his index finger. His scent, something between burnt cedar and new leather, filled the entire vestibule before I reached him. You're shooting today, he said. No preamble. Private range. Outside the city. No audience. I raised an eyebrow on reflex. I never asked to shoot. I know, he answered, and opened the elevator door. But I want you to never again feel your pulse spike when someone walks up behind you. I didn't know what to say to that. I grabbed my coat from the rack and followed him to the elevator without asking anything else, this time with my eyes open. The range was 40 minutes outside the city, hidden behind an industrial machinery warehouse that probably belonged to some capo's cousin. Inside, the smell was of old gunpowder, oil, and damp concrete, and the metal sheet roof rang quietly every time the wind pushed something around outside. The lamps buzzed in a yellow tone, and the paper targets hung from steel cables, still, like people waiting for an order to move. Matteo was waiting for us near the bench with 2 pairs of ear protection and the patience of a man who shows up every Thursday no matter what is going on in the world. Miss Blackwood, he said, tilting his head slightly. Today we will learn that a firearm has recoil. It does not kick. Is there a difference? I asked. There is a difference in everything, miss, including between those 2 words. Dominic positioned me in front of the paper target. His hand touched my waist with no pressure, just to turn me 3 centimeters, and I felt my breathing shift the way it had shifted in the ballroom. He noticed. He didn't comment. His palm was warm through the knit, and I hated how much I noticed it. Feet apart, he said near my ear. Knees soft. Don't lock your elbow. The gun is light, but it will feel heavy the first few seconds. Breathe. I am breathing. You're not. Breathe again. I breathed. I aimed. I fired. The first shot went into the ceiling, and the metal sheet returned a short echo that made me hunch my shoulders. The second went so far past the target that Matteo coughed elegantly, turning his face toward a corner where he assumed no one was looking. I felt the shame climb up my neck in waves, and I was about to lower the gun, but Dominic touched my wrist lightly and held it in place. Again, he said, don't think about the second shot. You're thinking about both at once. I closed my eyes for a moment, and in that moment, I saw the hotel lobby, the citrus cologne, Caleb's hand on my arm again, the service corridor, the panel with a single button. When I opened my eyes, I fired. The paper tore exactly through the middle of the silhouette's chest. I laughed. Not a controlled laugh, a girl's laugh, the kind that escapes when you forget to hold it in. Dominic laughed too, low, at the corner of his mouth, a short sound I had never heard come out of that man in public. Matteo, at a distance, stopped writing in the notebook where he was jotting things no one had asked him to jot. 20 paces away, Matteo murmured something to the capo next to him, without lifting his eyes from the paper. It was too low for me to catch the words, but loud enough for the capo to laugh shortly, the way the men of that house laughed when the Don wasn't paying attention. I caught only one loose word, Constitution, and almost missed the fourth shot trying to figure out the rest. I fired about 10 more times with growing patience. By the end of the afternoon, I was holding the gun without my hand shaking, and the smell of gunpowder had mixed with my own smell, in a way I wasn't sure whether bothered me or pleased me. Dominic watched me from a distance, while putting away the equipment, and there was something in the way he was looking, not the pride of an owner, the relief of a man. That night, before dinner, he called me to his office, not in the East Corridor, the other one, the one with smoked glass overlooking the city, where the lights of the buildings were coming on in little yellow windows, like an unfinished board game. He set a small velvet box on the desk, and the dark velvet absorbed all the light around it. "It's not a piece of jewelry," he said, before I could pull back. "Open it." It was a watch. Discreet, slim, dark leather strap with nearly invisible black stitching, black dial. It looked like the kind of watch serious executives wore out of habit, not for luxury. "So, you can always reach me," he explained. "The side button, held down for 3 seconds, opens a direct line to Matteo and me. The same button pressed once starts continuous audio recording. It works even in the shower. Don't mention the watch to anyone, not even Matteo." I laughed again. "You're giving me a spy watch." "I'm giving you a way out," he corrected, and fastened the strap around my left wrist with the care of someone who still remembered that the same wrist had once been held 2 seconds too long in a library. His fingers lingered on the buckle a little longer than necessary, and I pretended not to notice. Before going upstairs, I picked up the notebook in the reading room, tore out a page myself, and drew on top of his desk. 5 minutes. Dominic standing at the range, feet apart, arm extended, invisible target, calm expression. I handed it over. He looked at it in silence longer than he had looked at anything else that week. Then he folded the page in 4 and slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket, exactly over his chest, in the place where the other one was probably already kept. "Tonight," he said, not looking at me, "is the annual family gala. You need to be ready by 8. The third event. I went upstairs to get ready with the watch on my wrist, and a tightness in my chest I still couldn't name. The dress was black, long, bare back, high neckline in front. I knocked twice on my own bedroom door frame to call Adelaide. I still had the key. That was how it worked there. And she came up to zip me in, watching me in the mirror with a tenderness she would never admit, smoothing a loose strand behind my ear as if I were her daughter. When I came down the stairs, Dominic was in the entrance hall already in a tuxedo, the low light of the chandelier drawing angles on his face. He didn't say anything. He just offered me his arm, and I took it as if it were something I had always done. The family gala occupied the top floor of the partner hotel, with low chandeliers and the 4 dons of the 5 families seated at strategic tables. I already knew how to recognize the discreet crest of the V with the laurel leaves on the invitations. I already understood that wine-colored ties meant respect, that onyx rings meant jurisdiction. Dominic introduced me with a touch of his hand at my lower back. Always light, always asking for permission without asking. The first odd thing was a wrong silence near the entrance. An hour into dinner, I lifted my eyes from the champagne. The glass was sweating in my hand, and saw Matteo approaching too fast for someone with his posture. He whispered something in Dominic's ear. Dominic's face didn't change, but his hand at my lower back tightened with pressure for a fraction of a second before letting go. "Ivy," he said, low. "Stay close to Adelaide, please." I didn't. Caleb got past the first barrier with an invitation forged by a political ally who hadn't yet understood the tide had turned. He was identified almost immediately. I saw 2 capos move from the east corner of the ballroom, but he had enough seconds to grab the microphone from the master of ceremonies and reach the stage before anyone could intercept him. Dressed the way he always was. Flawless light suit, hair slicked back, the smile of a man born believing nothing could remove him from anywhere. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, with that velvet voice he had rehearsed in the mirror. "Before this evening goes any further, I feel a moral obligation to inform the Vale family that the woman your Don has been introducing as his wife is, in truth, a con artist who staged my personal humiliation in order to benefit from this family's protection. The ballroom went silent. Dominic took a step forward. I raised my hand. It was a small gesture, almost invisible, but Dominic stopped. Matteo stopped. 4 dons in the ballroom stopped. I walked to the stage with the black dress grazing my ankles, and my right hand steady the way I had learned to be steady at the range that afternoon. Each step on the marble sounded louder than it should have, and I noticed with a strange clarity that the heel of my shoe had the tick of a clock. I climbed the 3 steps. Caleb smiled at me as if I were a child who had wandered onto the wrong stage. "Sweetheart, go back to your table. Give me the microphone, Caleb." "Ivy, you're making a fool of the microphone." His hand hesitated. That was enough. I took the microphone out of his fingers without violence, the same way he had taken so many things from me over 4 years. I set my phone on the lectern. I opened the messaging app I had exported and stored in 3 different clouds over the last 8 months. "I'm going to read 3 messages," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Dates, times, and exact words. Anyone who wants to verify authenticity is welcome to request the raw files afterwards. I read the first. It was a death threat dressed up as longing, sent at 3 in the morning on a Saturday. My voice didn't tremble. I read the second. It was a detailed description of what he would do to me when he found me. I felt the room collectively hold its breath. Somewhere at some table, someone set a glass down with a dry click on crystal. I read the third. It was a photo he had sent of the spare key to my Brooklyn apartment, captioned, "I know where you sleep." When I finished, the silence in the ballroom was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Dominic, without coming up to the stage, made a minimal gesture with 2 fingers. The screen behind me lit up. Bank statements appeared, transfers to municipal judges, phone records, receipts from hotels where Caleb had taken other women during our engagement. Matteo had pulled all of that together in 3 weeks and kept it in the dark, waiting for this exact second. 2 men in black suits came in through the main door. They weren't Kepos. Matteo had handed over the previous week a dossier of financial evidence to Agent Higgins, of the Manhattan field office. A discreet nod from Dominic from the corner of the ballroom was enough for the agent, already dining at a civilian guest's table 2 rows back, to stand and cross the room. Caleb was led out of the ballroom without any resistance, because the kind of man he was only resisted people who feared him. As he passed the first row of tables, he turned his face toward me, and I held his gaze until his neck broke first. I came down off the stage with my hands trembling, but on my feet. I crossed the ballroom with my head held high, listening to the murmur reorganize itself behind me like water finding its level again. I walked past Dominic without looking at him, not out of resentment, out of survival. If I looked at him, I would collapse there on the marble, and I had decided I would not collapse in front of anyone. I went up alone to the penthouse terrace, and the whole of Manhattan night opened like a silent mouth to receive me. Chapter 6. You Fix the Rest of My Life. The terrace was cold. I hadn't brought a coat, and my bare arms goosebumped against the October air rising off the Hudson with that damp smell of a tall city, of distant taxi exhaust, of an autumn that had forgotten to announce its arrival. I rested my hands on the stone railing, and the stone was even colder than the air, a mausoleum cold that hurt the wrist bone. I looked at the city below, the yellow and white lights blending like broken glass, the taxis cutting across avenues, life going on indifferent to a ballroom 40 floors up, and I finally let the tremor run through my entire body. I did not cry for Caleb. Caleb had fallen, and his fall was too small to deserve a tear. I cried for the woman I'd had to be in order to survive him, for the girl who had taken the first shove as if it were an accident, and the second as if it were exhaustion, and the third as if it were her fault for having spoken too loud in front of his mother, for the fiancé who had learned to explain bruises with stares, with doors, with the creative excuse of someone who lost count of how many times she had to make something up, for the illustrator who had changed her number 3 times in 8 months, who slept with the light on, who had memorized escape routes in every coffee shop in Brooklyn, who knew by heart where every fire exit was, every bathroom, every alley, for the woman who had walked into the wrong elevator because the lobby had smelled of citrus and fear had been the same thing for so long that she no longer told them apart. I cried quietly, arms wrapped around myself, let the city bear witness, and let the wind dry me before I went back down. I didn't hear the door open. I knew he was there because the air changed, the way the air changes when someone large enters a large space without making a sound. It's a strange thing to learn. I had learned it over the past few weeks. Dominic occupied space in a way that did not depend on footsteps. He stopped 2 paces from me. He didn't touch. He didn't speak first. He waited, as if he knew that the only thing worse than being alone in that moment was being invaded inside it. When I finally turned my face, he had taken off his jacket and was holding it out to me, folded once over his arm, offered with the calm of someone offering water, not a favor. I took it. The warm weight settled over my shoulders, carrying the smell of sandalwood and cedar, and something of his I had no name for, but would have recognized in the dark, in a crowded room, behind a closed door. The silk lining still held the warmth of his body, and it was that warmth, not the fabric, that made me stop trembling. "You walked into the wrong elevator," he said, low, and his voice came out rougher than I'd ever heard it, scraped on the inside as if he had spent the whole night holding that sentence back so it wouldn't come out too soon. "And fixed the rest of my life." I choked on a laugh that was almost a sob, and the wind carried the sound away before I could be embarrassed by it. "You opened the door," I answered, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, and pretended it was calculation. He took the step that was missing. He pressed his forehead against mine, slowly, without pressure. His eyes asked. Mine answered. I was the one who pulled his face down. The kiss wasn't hunger. It was surrender. It was 40 days of almost. Of stay whispered in the middle of a storm when he still thought asking was asking too much. He pulled back first. Not much. Just enough to look. "Say it out loud," he asked, and his voice was nearly a whisper, and I recognized in it the man who had never touched a woman without a word spoken, the 12-year-old boy who had decided that in a cemetery. "I choose you," I answered, and my voice didn't tremble. Standing up, awake, no excuse. He closed his eyes for a second, like someone taking a good blow. When he opened them, something in his eyes had changed color. He lifted me in his arms with an ease I hadn't known existed, one arm under my knees, the other behind my back, his jacket falling from my waist like a forgotten flag. He crossed the terrace, the inside hall, the east corridor. The wall sconces passed above us in patches of gold. The door of his bedroom closed behind us with a discreet click, the kind made by the doors of wealthy people, and the city, far below, kept running as if nothing important had happened. I woke up with the cold light of New York coming in sideways through the window, and for a second I didn't know where I was. His heavy arm rested at my waist. His breath came slow against the back of my neck. Warm, steady, safe. Dominic was sleeping, something Adelaide had once told me, with the patience of a housekeeper who had served bosses for decades, was rarer than snow in August. She had laughed quietly when she said it, drying a dish with a linen cloth, and I hadn't understood the joke then. I understood it now. I turned slowly inside the circle of his arm. He didn't wake. The weight of his hand simply resettled on my hip, possessive even in sleep. It was the first time I had seen him without armor, without the jacket, without the signet ring he usually wore on his little finger, without the tense line between his brows, without the locked jaw he wore in public like a second skin. He looked younger, the way hard men look when sleep takes the frame off. He looked like the boy who had lost his mother at 12 and had decided that day that no one would come close again without permission. I smiled a little. It wasn't a smile to show anyone. It was the smile of a woman who had slept a whole night without locking the door from the inside, without mentally rehearsing the route to the window, without keeping her phone under the pillow with the police number queued up on the screen. I got up slowly, with the care of someone who doesn't want to break a miracle. I picked up his shirt from the floor, put it on, buttoned it halfway. The hem hit the middle of my thighs, and the fabric carried his scent again. Sandalwood and cedar, and something of dry whiskey from many hours earlier. I left barefoot, and the corridor rug was soft the way I had always thought rugs ought to be and never were in the places I had lived. The water carafe was kept in the pantry. I crossed the east corridor, because it was the shortest way, because peace made me careless, because at that point I was no longer afraid of locked doors. That's when I saw it. A crack. The door of the office in the east corridor, the one that never opened, the one I had accepted for weeks as part of the silent geography of that house, was open about 2 fingers' width. Maybe Matteo had gone in there the night before, during all the commotion of the gala, and forgotten to lock it. Matteo was careful, but even a Don's consigliere makes mistakes on the night the Don kisses a woman for the first time in years. I know I shouldn't have gone closer. I know. But the door cracked open wasn't the whole door open. And I, who had pressed my palm against that wood one early morning 40 days earlier, and sworn to myself I wouldn't ask, decided that looking through a crack was not the same as opening it. I pushed 2 more fingers' width. Just 2. The room was dark. except for a strip of pale light coming through the window with its half-drawn curtain. There was a large, dark wood desk, tall shelves with books with worn spines, a safe in the back wall, a leather chair turned toward the window as if someone had spent the night there looking at the city without turning on a single lamp, and on the desk, a drawer, half open too, as if the whole night were made of drawers no one had had time to close. I took one step inside, just one. The floor didn't creak. Inside the drawer, papers stacked methodically, folders labeled with initials I didn't recognize, and, wedged between two folders, the edge of an old photograph, the kind printed on matte paper, the kind nobody prints anymore, with that faintly yellowed tone of something kept too long without being turned over. I pulled it out with the tips of my fingers just enough to see. It was him, Dominic as a teenager, 17 maybe, the hair longer, falling a little over his forehead, the jaw sharper, the shoulders still without the breadth of the man I had learned to recognize in the dark, and beside him, leaning against his shoulder with the intimacy of someone who had been leaning there for a long time, with the naturalness of someone who had never thought to ask permission, was a dark-haired girl, navy blue dress, a thin necklace at her throat, a small, sidelong smile of someone who knew the effect she had. I could only see half of her face, the rest was cut off by the folder, and even that half was enough to suggest a beautiful girl, delicate features, in a time that was not mine. I felt a chill run down my back that I couldn't name. I stood there frozen for 3 seconds, maybe 4, the time it takes for a silly thought to pass and go away. Everyone has a past, I thought. I do. He does. Including he had a past before me, and before the dawn, and before everything. Including he was 17 years old once, and he dated girls in navy blue dresses, and he was probably happy on a few summer afternoons without knowing he was happy, and that took nothing away from what had happened last night on the terrace. That girl in the photo was archive. I was the morning. I pushed the photo back into the folder carefully, at exactly the depth I had found it. I closed the drawer with the tips of my fingers, slowly, without creaking. I closed the office door behind me with the same care, hearing the handle settle into place with that low click of something returning to its spot. I shook my head once, the way you wave off a small insect. I crossed the corridor back without getting any water. The thirst had passed, the way thirst passes when the body decides it has something more important to deal with. When I went back into the bedroom, Dominic was still asleep. The light had advanced a little on the floor, drawing a clear rectangle on the rug. I slid back into the circle of his arm, with the same delicacy of someone returning to a nest, and he, without opening his eyes, pulled me against his chest with an unconscious firmness that made me smile a third time that morning. "You're cold," he murmured against my hair, still half asleep, his voice slurred with sleep. "I am," I answered, and tucked my head under his chin, where his pulse beat slow and clear against my temple. He held me a little tighter. He ran his hand down my back once. Distracted, possessive, an owner. His breathing slowed again until it returned to the rhythm of before. I closed my eyes. The doubt, subtle, dissolved in the warmth of his chest, in the smell of the shirt, in the sound of the city below continuing to run as if nothing important had happened, for now. Lena here. That wraps up Book 1, and I've already finished Book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. 3 months after the wrong elevator, I stopped locking the door. I thought Dominic Vale had saved me. I thought that when he called me my wife, it was no longer part of any lie, of any more abuse, until my phone buzzed. A photo of him walking into a hotel with a brunette I had already seen hidden in his drawer. Then, a video. She was adjusting the collar of his shirt with too much intimacy, too much touching. And the caption finished me. Serena Moretti, the beautiful fiancée he never let go. And I understood too late that maybe I had only been the woman who occupied his bed while the real fiancée waited for her time to come back. Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book too, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.